Hello again, everyone. My name is Lindsay Foreman, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our artist talk today with Tracey-Mae Chambers. Before we get started for the day, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are situated within the traditional lands and waters that have been taken care of by the local land-based First Nations since time immemorial. And currently, the closest land-based nations are the Katzie, Kwantlen, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. But ancestors have stewarded these lands and waters from time immemorial. So today, I just sort of would like people to reflect on that is our joint stewardship role going forward, has been since settlers arrived and going forward. And today we are also going to discuss a little bit more about colonization and decolonizing, which is part of this wonderful hashtag Hope and Healing Canada project that we're going to hear about from Tracey-Mae Chambers. So thank you again for joining us. I just wanted to once again remind everyone that we do have the recording on for this talk. We will be sharing a copy of it online in the future so others can learn more who were not able to attend live. And for now, I would like to say thank you so much again for all of you. And I'm going to introduce my colleague, Caitlin Roberts, who's the Fine Arts Curator here with the Township of Langley, to introduce our wonderful artist, Tracey-Mae Chambers.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. So across the lands known today as North America, Tracey-Mae Chambers has been creating and constructing site-specific installations which carry a powerful message. This 4-year-long project entitled hashtag Hope and Healing Canada hints at the past and present stories that each installation location holds for their community. Chambers has been invited to share this work on the outside of the Langley Centennial Museum in Fort Langley, as the interior is now permanently closed to the public. She is currently in the middle of installing the work and welcomes you to view the installation that will be up until April 10th, 2023, so a few months, which is really exciting. Chambers has worked as an artist for nearly a decade and now identifies as an installation artist, but has dabbled in a few other mediums for sure. Currently based in Beamsville, Ontario, Chambers is a member of the Métis Nation of Ontario. Her family is from the traditional Métis communities of Sault Ste. Marie and Penetanguishene, Ontario. Join us as we celebrate Chambers' work and watch as she paints the Langley Centennial Museum red. So before I pass off the talk to Tracey-Mae Chambers, I just ask that if you have any questions, please save them for the end of the talk. Just as we don't want to be distracting for Tracey-Mae. I know that it's can be distracting to have talks while you're giving presentation. So feel free to write them down as you think of them. You can put them in the chat, and Lindsay and myself will monitor them so that we can iterate them once the talk is complete. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Tracey-Mae Chambers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. And thank you so much to Lindsay and Caitlin for the lovely introduction. I'm actually going to dive right into the PowerPoint. That's how I'll be presenting today. So I'm just going to share my screen. Awesome. Again, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. And if you're listening to this after the fact, certainly look up the hashtag on, even if you just put it in Google, it'll come up on Instagram, but also on Facebook and a couple of other platforms, and then link you to my website. So we're gonna dive right in here. So I started this project tried to figure out what I was going to do with my art practice in May and June of 2021. We were still in that whole COVID, the years that shall not be named. And I really wasn't sure what to do with myself. And I think a lot of people were feeling the same sort of way. But then all sorts of things started happening. When the first graves were identified in Kamloops was sort of the tipping off point for me. And we were all sort of feeling, I think we were all sort of feeling feelings that I've listed here. And I tried to write these things down as I was identifying what to do next in my art practice, and how to address the issues surrounding residential schools and colonization. So these are the feelings that I was feeling, but I'm sure I'm sure you were feeling, if not all, at least some of these feelings. And it's hard to know where to put that degree of pain or confusion or just sadness. So I had to figure out a way to deal with that. So I'm trying, as I make these installations, I'm trying to talk about the connections between humans, but there's a great disparity between Indigenous communities and Inuit and Métis people and settler communities a lot of the times. So lots of times I think settlers don't know how to approach people in Indigenous communities, and the separation and the divide between us just keeps getting bigger. So I tried to figure out why I felt that way, why I was feeling the way I was feeling about how to be a part of a community or multiple communities. And I sort of came up with the thought that I need to deconstruct my own ideas and my own environment. So decolonization is, as you know, I'm preaching to the choir, but a very complicated process, and it's intimidating to a lot of people. So even the conversation of decolonization is enough to promote conflict, which is not what we want. So my work, I hope that my work is the beginning of a conversation that's not confrontational, where we can speak about it in a more respectful way without it being too heavy, because we're starting with this sort of arch and then we move forward into looking at the colonization or the institutionalized colonization. People ask all the time about why I use red. It's a very powerful color. My favorite color is yellow, but certainly that would not be the right color to do a project like this. But there's no other color that sort of represents anger, passion, blood, love. But it has a negative connotation as well, right? It's I was in an Uber the other day, and a man, the man that I was talking to was from India, and I said, he asked, I don't know, we were talking about something anyways, and he said, oh, you mean red Indian? I was like, oh my goodness. So that's how he identifies First Nations people from here and his Indian. It was just a weird conversation, but that's the reason that it's red. So I started with my own space. So the space on the left is actually my apartment. We had moved in, and what I did was I wanted to talk, or I wanted to decolonize my own space. And part of colonization is capitalism, and the way that we view buying things and purchasing things, and the way we view money and accumulation is not an Indigenous worldview. So I took everything out of my living room. I just want a sidebar to say my husband is 6'6". So when he was away, that's when I did this, because when he came home, he wasn't able to use our living room for a couple of days because he couldn't walk anywhere, but I could get underneath there. So that's all that really mattered. So I took everything out of my living room, everything except for the chairs and the couch and the 2 glass pieces, which I couldn't move by myself. Then I only put back the things that mattered to me. So I put back photos of my parents and my children, my grandmother's teacup, things that really matter to me, which tended not to be brand new things. They tended to be things that I'd had for a long time. That's what I put back. And I realized that in my kitchen was this pile of things that I had no idea what I had them for. And I realized that I've been programmed to consume, just at random, just consume. The one on the right-hand side is actually, because of COVID, I couldn't install anywhere to just even try test pieces. So this is in the apartment building that I live in. It was the parking garage. So I built this over 2 or 3 days, just try to figure out how to use space with this red and how it would photograph. But also because the building that I lived in was filled with students, international students, and every one of the vehicles, aside from mine, was a high-end luxury vehicle, which was very strange to me. So that's another part of this whole capitalist narrative, the purchasing of these high-end vehicles and the status that apparently comes from those. So just it was funny to me that colonialism touches every aspect of our lives without us knowing it, or without me knowing it. So one of the first galleries that had me come was the Grimsby Art Gallery, which is on the left-hand side. And what I did was I created sort of like a tornado, which was kind of how I felt like when I was there. The 3 sticks that are there were actually there when I got to the art gallery. And it felt like an Indigenous person in a space is like a tornado, where, you know, generally speaking, they're a marginalized group that is not comfortable in museum settings or art galleries. So that's what I felt like. I felt like, you know, this is the first gallery I've done, and I feel like a tornado. I feel like I want to go in and disrupt what's happening here and just shift the narrative on its axis. So quite literally, some spaces don't tend to be open to marginalized communities. The space on the right is an art gallery that's built into was a bank. And so it's a large set of stairs, and it has these iron gates, and it's not accessible. And that space felt to me like a place that, you know, sort of locked out, and it's intimidating. And that's part of colonialism too, is to make it, is to say, we're comfortable here, and having you here makes us uncomfortable. And so we don't want you here. So again, going in to disrupt these spaces to change that narrative is a large part of this work. For me anyways, that's how I tend to view it. I did some work in Ontario. This is along the Niagara Gorge. And when I was at this specific place, I did not know that First Nations and Métis fighters were with the British at this specific place near the Brock Monument in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and fought against the Americans. And to me, that was another narrative that was false, because we don't tend to talk about everyone that was included in these sort of, whether it be wars or skirmishes, but we don't talk about everyone. We only tend to talk about settler action as opposed to, you know, the actions of everyone. So I like the fact that I can be political, but still that the work is pretty. So the work on the left is at Queen's Park, I'm sorry, at the Parliament Buildings in Ottawa. And I was there, you can just barely see a police car sort of in behind me, and I had security. I had them move, but I had security that had those big guns and stuff like that. And that was as close as they would let me come to the Parliament Buildings, because they were doing construction, but also because it was COVID. So I had pre-made part of, it's a 28-foot braid. And so I sat there and finished it for the day, for 8 or 9 hours while I sat on those steps, which was great, because the intervention into that space too is a political action. And on the right-hand side, it's at the Tom Thompson Gallery, and it's a flower with part parts that sink into the earth and parts that reach up to the new growth in the tree. But still has a message. And I like the fact that the work, in my estimation anyways, that the work is able to speak without being confrontational. I can start a conversation with someone who comes up to say, wow, that's really pretty. In particular, the flower on the right. Wow, that's really pretty. What are you doing? And then it opens that conversation so easily into what I'm doing and why. And 99% of the time, it's a positive outcome that comes from that conversation. So some of the places that I've installed have been less than comfortable. This is Shanghua Residential School near Sault Ste. Marie at the Algoma University. I was there for 2 days. In the wintertime, there's no heat in this building, and there is lights, but they're very dim. So the photography was pretty difficult. I don't have a high-end camera or anything like that. So, but being able to, I'm so grateful that the survivors allowed me into the space and honored that they allowed me into the space. It was uncomfortable, but worth every effort. I wanted to disrupt the space by using the Bibles that I found in a box when I was looking for a broom, actually. But anyways, I found the box of Bibles and I put all the large adult Bibles on that front landing there, open, but the little Bibles I closed, I turned over, hoping that the people who left that building let go of whatever it was that they learned in that space. What I didn't know when I went into the space and did the work, this is in December of 2021. What I didn't know was that right outside the door is where the graveyard is. It's unmarked, completely unmarked. Yet the spaces where people who attended this church that were not people or children within the residential school, they are marked graves. It's such a strange feeling being in a space like this. I can't do it justice in this conversation to say how difficult it was to work here. The book that you see that's open, that's a red binder, is actually the list of names of the children that are in that graveyard. And when you realize how little these people are, it's more and more uncomfortable. All the woodwork in this space was created by the young men at the residential school in the wood shop that they had in this space. This particular installation, as well as a couple of others, are the most poignant to me thus far, because it's a chance to talk to settlers about something that they for the most part don't want to talk about, and that part of colonialism is incredibly delicate. The conversation is incredibly delicate, and certainly not my story to tell. But is a story that needs to be heard and a conversation that needs to be had. This is another one that was a difficult one to do. This is actually the template for residential schools. So it was a plan by Egerton Ryerson. It's actually contained at the Black Creek Pioneer Village in Toronto. So it's a copy of the template. So I was so honored to be able to create here as well. So the chair at the front of the classroom, I have suspended from the ceiling, held up by a web of crochet. And that is that tangle of colonialism. And that is propping up this person at the front of the classroom, which is why the chair is suspended above the floor. And then what I did was I built, it's very difficult to see this, but on the left-hand side, I used the center of the wood stove, the pipe, as the center of the top of a longhouse. So what it actually is a longhouse built over the children. So it's bringing the children back into the longhouse. So, and yes, I realize not all communities are longhouse communities, but that's what I was able to build in this space. And again, no electricity and no heat in this building, and difficult to photograph. But it's a powerful place to be when you are, as I was creating, and I went from the back of the room to the front of the room, and you realize how little the chairs are. And you realize that the children that were in spaces like this were away from their parents, and they were tiny people. And that it becomes more and more powerful when you look at it from that vantage point. This is the Mohawk Institute in Brantford, Ontario. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side is the residential school. On the opposite side is Woodland Cultural Center. The tree that is I'm using in this installation, and I'm sorry that I can't remember the name of the tree and how old it is, but it's very old. And this was a very difficult place to create in, obviously, but what's strange about it is the day I was creating, I had a video crew with me, and from Six Nations, and that gentleman brought his son with him, and he was 12. So he helped me install, which I've never had before. I've never had any help. So it was like the best day ever. So he would be in the tree, he'd climb the tree, I would throw the yarn up to him, and then he would wrap it on something like a branch or something where I wanted it and throw it back down to me. But while he did that, he told me the creation story. He told me how to skin a rabbit, and I want to point out that I'm vegan. So it was a whole thing. It was so gross, but it was lovely listening to him tell me about all this and how to debone a fish, and like he just chatted the whole time. I worked, he chatted. It was lovely. It was such a good day, and I loved being with him. So we made this structure that, again, I wanted parts to go into the ground and parts to reach up into the tree, so that's connection between the new growth and the roots, which I think is incredibly important. And what's lovely is that there was these two generations. It was him and his father. When I went to take this down, it was a very difficult day because they were doing the ground penetrating radar on that day. So while I was taking this down, to the right-hand side, if you're looking at the right-hand photo, to the right-hand side of this is actually where they were doing that. So I saw that the entire time that I was taking this installation down, and it felt, I wanted to leave because I felt so intrusive. I felt like I was being intrusive in this event that was so important and so emotional that was happening. And I was taking down this installation. So I just tried to remember this young boy telling me all these stories and thinking about that as opposed to what was happening there at the same time. But what struck me was, had it been, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, that boy would have been at this school. And that's what struck me so horribly that day, was that. And sometimes it's hard to connect this with reality when we're not a part of it. But that day was a turning point for me because I felt it so intensely. So this is the Ontario, yes. And so lots of times places like this sell Indigenous art or Inuit carvings and Métis weavings, and they're part of this market that people want to purchase, but that money doesn't end up in the hands of the artists. It ends up in the hands of the owners of these kinds of places. So I was lucky to be able to install here. I was only given the day. I had to take it down at the end of the day. But it was nice to be in this space because it was me intervening into this space that at this point, yes, it is fair, more fair now, but it's still a part of like a problematic environment where art is sold as a commodity and or replicated by other people and sold as authentic. So I do reuse everything. I know that it must be difficult for people to understand that. So the left-hand side is literally what I get back, and the right-hand side is what ends up once I'm done rolling it. But if you think about it, I've done 133 installations at this point across Canada, beginning on July 23rd, 2021. And that's a lot of yarn coming and going. So I remake this into something else, or I re-sew it into something else, crochet, weaving, whatever. And some people think, oh, why don't you just throw it away? But it would be easier, believe me, it would be so much easier to throw it away. But that's part of the problem. That's part of our minds, the way we've started to think about the world. So I reject that, and I do reuse everything. And yes, there are pieces that I end up having to throw out, or whatever, small amounts that I have to throw out. But really, it's such a small amount at this point. I've gotten really good at repurposing this yarn into something else. So I do actually reuse all of the pieces that are here at the Langley facility. The large crochet that you'll see that connects the weavings is actually from, oh my gosh, just went out of my head. Anyways, a museum in Northern Ontario, and the weavings themselves have been at like 15 different museums and art galleries. So that's fabulous, right? So as they cross this country, they carry the stories of each one of those installations with them. And I like that continuity. And I hope you agree. So for example, when you saw the pictures of Xinhua, the residential school, it may have been hard to see, but there was a flower hanging from the ceiling. And if you look on the left-hand side here, this is a half of an installation that I've built in Quebec City. The very top circle that you see is from Xinhua, and now it's in Quebec City. So the installation you're seeing here on the left-hand side is 32 feet long by 14 feet wide times 2. So this is the first section. And then if you went forward about 15 feet, there's another one of this same length of installation, and it's lit with red lights at nighttime. What's lovely about this is it's around the corner it's in the Place Royale. And what's wonderful is that church, the church is there. And I like that juxtaposition between my work and what I want to say about organized religion. The space on the right-hand side is a part of, it's in, Rockville, Ontario. And those tiers have been in 6 different spaces. This is the 7th. They are usually tiers hung up and down, but in this, I've made them into sort of I wanted them to be sort of a canoe type shape. So again, just illustrating that the work is reused as it crosses Canada. I like the number of museums and the types of museums that are embracing the whole thought of decolonization. And lots of times I get asked what that means. So what it means to me is telling more than one story. It's not telling your story only. It's not telling my story only. It's telling all of the stories, whether that be Indigenous stories, settler stories, or newcomers in Canada. All of the stories are equally important, but they all need to be heard. So I find it encouraging that museums that have always told one story are open to telling other stories. And I find that incredibly important and really positive, because sometimes, I named this a hashtag purposefully, because it was easier to access for everyone, but also you can't heal without being hopeful. And as difficult as that is, it's difficult for all of us, no matter what it is that we're talking about. So it makes me hopeful. And sometimes it's really difficult to be hopeful, especially given what's happened in Canada over the last, I don't know, 14 months, 16 months, 3 years, and continues. So that's really what I find most striking, is how willing museums have become to decolonizing those spaces. And even if that means tearing down that institutional, that document that says, this is what our mandate is, this is the story we're telling, and tearing that up and starting from the beginning and starting over with a more open eye and a more open heart, and rebuilding and making it stronger. And I think the more stories that are involved, the stronger that institution can be. This is at the, oh gosh, I'm losing my mind. University of Waterloo, I think it was. And that flower that was at Chinois, and that's in that went to Quebec City, there it is again. I've just remade it into something else. I put a structure around it. So when I was here, a couple of different classes came out to hang out with me while I was working. And one of them was about the repatriation of artifacts and of art, which was, I did not know that was a course. That was completely unheard of to me. So they told me all about it, which was great. And I learned so much from those students about that and how that is happening across Canada. And then as I've spent time and spoken to people within each one of the institutions that I work at, it's interesting the number of places that are repatriating art and artifacts. And that's, I think, is another thing that makes me hopeful. I've used the weavings a lot, and people have asked questions about them. So I wanted to address that because I'm sorry that I don't remember how many are here, but I know it's more than 25. Let's say 30 weavings that I'm using here. I use the weavings because, to me, a weaving is a family. So there's all the strings woven together is what holds the weaving together, just like a family, right? It takes layers of people and different people, and some of those people are not actually related. They're Aunt Martha, who's really just grandma's best friend. But in order to be strong, we have to have all those people together, right? So that's those center weavings. And then they go out to smaller lines. And those lines are acquaintances and other people in the community. But no matter what, they're still connected to the next family, the next community. So each one of these circles could be a community, or it could be a family, or it could be a country, but it's still connected to the next one, whether we like it or not. The other thing about the weavings is I make them purposely because they make shadow. So when I lit this particular installation, which is at the Cambridge Art Gallery, I wanted there to be shadows, and I wanted people to be able to see that those are either those who have come before us or those who are yet to come. And we owe something to both of those groups. We owe something to those who have left us this world better than they found it, but also left us those stories, left us the responsibilities of those stories to pass forward. So I want the shadows to be part of the installation. They are not separate from it. They're not just happenstance. They are purposeful, because we tend to forget that we should be looking both directions. We should be looking back and we should be looking forward. That's, I think, the only way to stay hopeful. And again, the only way to heal is by looking in both of those directions. So this is close by you. So this is the Chilliwack Museum. This was wonderful to work as well. And again, this is another instance of a museum saying, we need to tell more than one story. And I'm so grateful for every museum and art gallery that lets me in the door to begin this conversation as calmly and quietly as we can, because that promotes respectful dialogue. Oh, my bad. So I just wanted to come back to this one for just 1 second. So I said about respectful dialogue, and I have to tell you that a couple of places that I've been, that's not what happens, which is uncomfortable for me, and I'm assuming uncomfortable for the person who thinks decolonizing public spaces is nonsense, which is, those kinds of people are difficult to talk to, but it isn't my job to do that. My job is just to open the door. My job is to begin the conversation. It is the job of museums, it is the job of settlers to decolonize. I'm just here sort of as a conduit between those two things. I just like things quiet. So I think that's why I like these kinds of installations, because people do ask questions. But that doesn't mean that I can reach everyone. And it doesn't mean that you can reach everyone. Because specifically one of the installations I was making, an elderly fellow came to speak to me and asked me what I was doing and asked me why I was doing it. And I told him that I felt that museums needed to tell more than one story. And he asked me what I meant. And I said, now this was in Alberta, in Southern Alberta. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, they need to tell Indigenous stories as well as the stories of settlers. And he told me I was full of shit. Pardon my language. And I turned around and went back to work, because there's nothing that I can say to him that's going to change his mind, unfortunately. And I'm not, I don't feel like it's my place to engage with someone like that. So that's why I think it's an important role of museums and galleries to redirect this, right? Because you're armed with this information about your community that you actually could have reached him, right? And can reach people like that, where I can't. So that makes me hopeful too. Just that I'm here makes me hopeful, because I realize that that's a stepping stone towards something better. And I hope that that's the way you view it as well. But I appreciate you being here today, and I hope that you'll come and see the installation at the museum out front here, and maybe understand a little better once you see it what I'm trying to say. And if you have any questions, I'm more than open to answering them.